Within Hollywood cinema, the teacher character has been a subject for entertainment for many films. Famous films as Stand and Deliver or Dead Poets Society are great examples of how the impact of teachers can inspire, guide, or even be someone to lean on in a time of struggle for the student. As an inspiring teacher myself, I've been able to really connect my own experiences with amazing teachers such as these, and reluctantly, teachers who I wish to never be in a room again with, like the teacher Mr. Strickland from Back to the Future, Mrs. Trunchbull in Matilda.
Are you a pig, Amanda? Do I allow pigs in my school?
However, as much as things are much easier seeing in such a black and white term as good and bad teaching, there is more than what meets the eye with the construction of the teacher character. In the book The Hollywood Curriculum, teachers in the movies Marie M. Dalton discusses the term the Hollywood model, where she explains how Hollywood teacher characters are granted a consistent set of traits. Within Hollywood films, the character of the teacher is portrayed in two modes, the good,
Carpe diem,
and the bad.
Sit down, you squirming worm of vomit!
The good teacher is typically an outsider to the administration or education world. Additionally, these characters connect with their students on a personal level and may bend the rules for the students' own furtherment. On the other hand, there is the bad teacher. This character is usually a veteran teacher who follows strict administration rules, treats students as people beneath them, and is someone who is usually bored or lost their passion to control bad students. However, what's missing from Dalton's research and many others is how the teacher character and their strategies apply to real-life teachers and their influence on students. In the book The ABCs of Learning, written by Daniel Schwartz, Jessica Sang, and Kristen Blair, they address 26 scientifically proven strategies to help with students' learning and how to teach them. In order to demonstrate these ideas, I will be looking at the films Dangerous Minds and Mr. Holland's Opus, that demonstrate good and bad examples of teachers and how they utilize these learning strategies. My reasoning for choosing these two films is that both teachers demonstrate good and bad learning strategies for teaching through a multicultural lens. Both these films also were made in the 1990s, where education reform was a major political topic, as well as multicultural education had only just begun being utilized in the classroom. Personal involvement and the power of belonging. Within both films, the strategies of personal involvement and belonging can be seen within both characters in the film. When used in a correct way, these strategies can be powerful to a student's learning, however can also be dangerous. Within Dalton's study, she describes Hollywood's depiction of good teachers as being personally involved with the students and having a more intimate relationship between teacher and student. Dalton says the good teachers in the movies are frequently more closely aligned with their students than with other adults in the school. Learning theorists suggest that in a real classroom, this connection is important to the student's ability to learn, engage, and work with the content material. The job of the teacher is not only to tell the students all the information and hope students retain it, but to craft it in a meaningful way that bridges the student's sense of self, culture, and goals. In the ABCs of Learning, a correlation to this Hollywood model is seen when describing a student's sense of belonging. Belonging is a perception of being accepted, valued, and included. Belonging can help learn by increasing effort and decreasing negative distracting thoughts. Within Mr. Holland's opus, this sense of belonging can be seen in Glenn Holland's private music lesson he gives to his clarinet student, Gertrude Lang. When he first starts teaching, his general attitude and demeanor he gives off is that he didn't really want to be there, and that the student's initial progress of playing within the orchestra were bad and not worth his time. During the lesson, Glenn makes sure to give Gertrude affirmations and encouragement when she is playing her instrument to create a cooperative space of respect and safety between them. Glenn also shows her a new way to look at playing the clarinet by telling her to imagine music visually like the sunset, rather than reading from a page. Benefit to this is Glenn affirms to Gertrude why she loves and wants to play music, which ultimately leads her to be successful in playing over the break on her clarinet. The impact of teaching with a sense of belonging can also be seen in Dangerous Minds, in a scene between Luann Johnson and Emilio Rodriguez. After Emilio gets into a fight with another student about a drug deal, Luann talks to Emilio and scolds him for picking a fight. However, she then offers him help and guidance as someone he can rely on despite the criminal activity he faces. This level of personal involvement and mutual respect for each other's authority causes Emilio and his classmates to feel seen by their teacher, leading them to participate more in class and begin to show more interest in their education. This relationship and rapport built with students will evidently enrich the student's learning. However, there are boundaries and dangers in becoming too close to a student. Becoming close to your student can be a common thing as a teacher. However, the relationship between student and teacher needs to be kept professional. We can see a blurring of these boundaries in some instances during both films, such as Glenn and Rowena kissing, or Michelle and Raoul getting dinner together.
Well, I guess it's just you and me, handsome.
I guess so.
Although these breaking of boundaries are used as a narrative and heartstring pull within the film, there are also dangers of the strategy within the classroom setting. In addition to these two films illustrating possible dangers of blurring personal and professional boundaries, they also reinforce and damage students' learning. One of the biggest dangers in a classroom setting of making a student not feel like they belong is it could reinforce negative stereotypes or feelings of being different. This also presents a problem to different racial identities and can be dangerous for the teacher to fall into a white savior trope. The white savior trope is when a white individual liberates or demonstrates superiority over a person of color that they could not so themselves. One way this is seen within the films is through Luann's character in Dangerous Minds, as she liberates her students by telling them by making good choices and going to school will save them from poverty.
Man, you come and live in my neighborhood for 1 week, and then you tell me if you got a choice.
But there are a lot of people who live in your neighborhood who choose not to get on that bus. What do they choose to do? They choose to go out and sell drugs. They choose to go out and kill people. They choose to do a lot of other things.
As a multicultural educator, it's important for all students to feel safe and respected based on their identity within the classroom. Although difficult to achieve, the ultimate feeling of belonging with students, the positive effect it has on learning is substantial, breaking the Hollywood trope and learning to adapt in the classroom. In addition to making an environment respectable and a safe learning space, it's important for the teacher to be able to be flexible in how they approach students' learning. Traits that make up the Hollywood teacher, Dalton expresses how teacher characters' close connection with students usually leads to those teachers breaking away from administration rules, which make them a good teacher. She notes the teacher-student relationships as portrayed in films vary in their degree of intimacy, but often involve some sort of breaking of the rules.
Mrs. Jacobs, you tell them that I am teaching music, and that I will use anything from Beethoven to Billie Holiday to rock and roll if I think it'll help me teach a student to love music.
Although this anti-establishment stance may seem overly romanticized within Hollywood depictions, education handbooks do encourage flexibility that could tie to violating protocols, breaking from standard procedures. One way to adapt in a classroom is to look at different learning styles. Is your student a visual learner or more hands-on? Do they respond to lectures and take notes, or learn more from participating in group activities? Looking within the film Mr. Holland's Opus, Glenn demonstrates flexibility in how he changes the way he teaches his students modes within music.
I'll bet all of you, whether you know it or not, already like Johann Sebastian Bach. What's this called?
Lover's Concerto.
Who wrote it?
The Toys.
Wrong. That was Minuet in G, and it was written by Johann Sebastian Bach.
Within the scene, students began to learn the principles that were previously taught that could not have been done if Glenn had continued to follow the set curriculum or program set by administration. The idea of flexibility can also be seen within Dangerous Minds, as Luann adjusts the way she relates to student interest in gang culture through using the poetry of Bob Dylan.
So what if I told you that Mr. Tambourine Man is a code name?
A code name for what?
A drug dealer.
Earlier in the film, when she first starts teaching, she tries to teach basic grammar structure, as the students ignore her, talking with friends, and not participating with the lesson. In order to reach her students, they discuss the poetry of the song lyrics of Mr. Tambourine Man by Bob Dylan. While flexibility and the analogies are effective, there are also risks to using these strategies incorrectly. Flexibility in the classroom is good to use when a student is not understanding a concept fully, or not quite connecting the dots. But there is a danger with too much flexibility. As a teacher, you want to avoid changing the original concept or information too much, because then the students won't learn what you need to teach. Both films fortunately do a good job at avoiding this risk. Overall, being flexible makes a good teacher, and within the Hollywood films, this is a positive way to look at them. Dalton states, good teachers discard or modify the approved curriculum to try to find a social curriculum that is more relevant to their students' lives. While this effort may make these teachers radical in the eyes of administrators who employ them and the larger public audience for Hollywood films, there is actually nothing very radical or even progressive about these teachers in the classroom. One of the struggles of multicultural education is incorporating all aspects of cultural identity within the class activities and curriculum to your student body. However, the results of being able to connect with students as well as allow them to share and express their own culture to their classmates will greatly improve learning. Within Hollywood cinema, the good teacher has something to learn from their students, whereas the bad teacher thinks they are a source of information. Within the classroom, it is important for the teacher to not only teach their students, but to learn from them as well. The power of feedback and using reward. Within the Hollywood cinema, the characteristics of the good teacher include learning from their students. This is also known as feedback between the student and the teacher. Feedback is defined within the ABCs of learning as information that flows back to learners about the quality of their ideas and behaviors. Learners could then use the feedback to make adjustments. Within Hollywood cinema, feedback can be seen as the teacher realizes something about oneself or their role as a teacher from their students. Dalton states, teachers in movies usually end up learning valuable lessons from their students. Within the film Mr. Holland's Opus, this can be seen when Rowena, a student of Glenn's, heads to New York to pursue singing. Without Glenn accompanying her, by letting her go, Glenn realizes how important his family is and how much he's loved the profession of teaching instead of his original passion of composing. In Dangerous Minds, this learning from students is when Luann decides to quit teaching. Her students convince her to stay because they need her as a positive role model. Dalton describes this trope, the threat of losing the teacher, or sometimes actually losing the teacher against his or her will, mobilizes the students so that they can finally deliver their own lesson to the teacher. This trope and aspect of the teacher character is used as a strictly narrative choice to students' emotional growth, as well as the teacher's character. However, the idea of learning from a student is a very important role as a teacher within the classroom. A very common way to look at learning as a teacher and teaching a student is through the power of feedback. Feedback is important to a student's sense of learning because it allows students to grow from their weakness and helps them progress instead of repeating mistakes over and over again. In addition to students, it's important for teachers as well. The strategy of feedback can be seen positively within the film Mr. Holland's Opus, when Glenn Holland is teaching Lou Russ how to drum. Within the film, we get a montage of the two working together individually. While Lou gets feedback on his playing and tapping to keep the beat, Glenn gives feedback through tapping with him, drumming on his head, having him dance to music, until he's finally able to keep the beat. Glenn receives feedback from the process of working with Lou, and how to eventually strategize the best possible way to teach a student, who he had referred to earlier in the film as unteachable. By structuring the lessons and feedback in an effective way, students are able to achieve the best outcome possible. Good examples of feedback can be seen within a group setting within Dangerous Minds. Reward is defined within the ABCs of learning as a desirable outcome received in response to a behavior. As might be expected, rewarding a behavior drives people to adopt that behavior. Within the film, Luann does an exercise with the students by asking them questions on grammar structure and to identify the parts of speech a word is associated with. If the student gets the question correct, then Luann rewards the student with a chocolate bar. Unlike Mr. Holland's Opus, where feedback was used through repetition, Dangerous Minds uses feedback in a more instantaneous learning. Mr. Holland's Opus shows a more long-term solution to feedback, as Dangerous Minds shows a more right and wrong response to feedback. Although the films demonstrate very positive ways to look at feedback and reward, there are still risks that the teachers should be made aware of within the classroom setting on how to best incorporate appropriate feedback to students. The biggest risk of feedback is that it can be interpreted as personal criticism rather than a constructive tip. The biggest risk of feedback is that it can be interpreted as personal criticism rather than a constructive tip. In order for students to not feel this way and not let ego get in the way of progress, it's important to remember the timing of your feedback, as well as to deliver constructive criticism with timing. Instead of saying words like, "I didn't like that," or say a blanket statement of, "Oh, you're a good writer," focus on the work itself. Feedback is also a huge important role as a multicultural educator. It's important for educators to be able to be honest with themselves and their students when it comes to incorporating culture into the classroom. Especially for white teachers, it can be hard to come to terms with our whiteness and how it intersects with class material. By using feedback from the students as well as the community as an educator, feedback can work to build a safe and culturally responsive classroom. Conclusion. Hollywood films do not simply provide inaccurate depictions of school administration. They actually provide illustrative examples worthy of analysis by not just media scholars, but educators as well. Through the lens of Dangerous Minds and Mr. Holland's Opus, readers and audience members can identify proper and successful learning strategies within Hollywood teacher characters and the risks of improper instruction. As an educator, it's our role to be responsive in the way we teach and look at how teacher characters are assembled. Using film is another valuable asset in the teacher's toolbox to help students succeed in the classroom. Thank you for watching.